Hi, everybody. So, today's installation of the Sergeant at Arms is about politicians and public service. So, what prompted that? Okay, so President Trump's been in office for about a month, and there's already been more than enough turmoil. So, most recently, he had to fire his national security advisor, Michael Flynn, because he had some conversations with the Russian ambassador to the US before President Trump was inaugurated, and that's illegal. As a private citizen, you can't have conversations with world diplomats, and neither of them were in their official capacity, the president or General Flynn. And because of that, that was illegal. And President Trump decided he was going to fire him. They're saying that it was a resignation, but he said he fired him. And then the other issue was Kellyanne Conway when she went on Fox and Friends morning show and basically started advertising for Ivanka Trump's fashion line at Nordstrom. Again, she is a public servant, and because she is paid by the government, she can't advertise or condone anything that's a private interest. And so, in both of those cases, there are protocols in place, but because neither of those people have spent much time in public service, I think it's just something that they didn't know, or maybe aren't used to. So, President Trump is a perfect example of that as well, which is he's been a successful businessman, but he, prior to his previous run and this run, had not run for public office before. He's never held public office before. So he doesn't know how to run the government. And most of the people that he's bringing in to the government with him are people who have not held public office. They've worked in business most of their lives, spent most of their career in corporate America. So they know how to run a business. But there's some issues with whether they know the protocols attached to being public servants. I think we have to realize that those are important facts in what we need out of our politicians. And so let me talk about politicians for a minute. So politicians, I think, get a bad rap. Not because there aren't bad politicians. There are bad politicians. We've known who they were. But there are some good politicians as well. There are people who actually accept that their role is to work in the interest of the voters and the citizens. And they do that, but they don't get as much attention as the bad politicians. And being a politician is basically being an expert in politics. I know this because I have a bachelor's degree in political science. It means that I am an expert in politics. No, I don't find anything impressive about that. There's nothing impressive about telling somebody I'm an expert in politics. But there is a value to it, and the value is I know the structure of the government. I know how to manage my way through the government process. And that's what we need. We need people who know the government, know the process, know how it's set up. Where it starts to get muddy is Washington, D.C., because there are state governments that run the same way as the federal government. There are municipal governments that run the same way because the structure of government is the same, just at different levels. The federal government starts to get a little muddy because we're talking about Washington insiders. And things that happen in Washington happen because those people are too far away from their constituents. And so they live kind of in a bubble. And because they live in that bubble we call inside the Beltway, they forget that their first role is to be working in the interest of the people. Now, having said that, politicians are no different than doctors and lawyers and accountants. And I've known good doctors, good lawyers, good accountants, and I've known bad ones as well. So we kind of have to take that with a grain of salt. I think we have to be in a position where we're willing to say to our public officials, hey, listen, this is supposed to be about public service, not about your individual interests. And I think one of the things that we have to realize is, we spend so much time talking about change that we don't force them to focus on public service. And unless everything in Washington changes, like that new show on ABC called Designated Survivor, where everybody is in the Capitol at the State of the Union, all of our lawmakers, and the Capitol gets blown up. And so they're all gone except for the designated survivor, who happens to be the Secretary of Health and HUD, Secretary of HUD, Housing and Urban Development. And that person ends up being the president of the United States. And there's one senator that survives and one congressperson, I think. So there's one Republican and one Democrat. There's three people, and they are basically our leadership. Okay, in a situation like that, you could start over again and you could affect a lot of change. But we currently have 562 representatives and 100 senators. We are not getting rid of them all at once. That is not going to happen. And because it's not going to happen, we have to make sure that we're much more thoughtful about the way that we elect our presidents, the way we elect our congresspersons, because again, those are the people who end up making the laws. And one of the things I think we also miss is I've talked to people who say, I want my president to be like the guy next door. Or I want my congressman to be like the guy next door. No, you don't. You don't want them to be like the guy next door. You want them to be an expert in politics. I know I personally do not want my neighbors on either side to be my representative of any sort. I want to know that the people who are representing me are experts in their field. So I need to know the judges are experts in the law. I need to know the congresspersons are experts in making laws and making public policy. And I need to know that I have a president who knows how to govern and knows how to run an administration. Having said all of that, we're in a position where we've elected a president and decided to say, let's see how this goes. So we have no choice but to see how this goes. And it has started out a little bit rocky from our perspective. But let me also say, President Trump and also his chief of staff, Reince Priebus, has said the White House is running like a fine-tuned machine. I think where there's a disconnect with that is that they're speaking of the internal workings of the White House. So my guess is everybody in the White House gets along with each other swimmingly. I would bet they do. And so that's what President Trump sees. And so when he says the White House is running like a fine-tuned machine, he's talking about how everybody gets along in the White House and is working together in the White House. He's not taking into account what we see from the outside looking in, or that all those problems that they're having, regardless of whether they're working together very diligently to fix whatever problems there are. When we see things like a month in, he has to fire one of his senior advisors, and we see things like, or another of his senior advisors is being, there may be an investigation into her remarks with regard to advocating for private interests. Those are things that definitely concern us. We should also be concerned about the fact that he, is putting out executive orders and they're being overturned by federal courts. These are the things that make us say, maybe things aren't going so well, even if inside he thinks things are going well. So, leave me some comments. I'm curious to find out what you think about public service, what you think about politicians, what you think about the change argument. I mean, these are things that we should be focused on as opposed to being focused on which politicians are doing a great job and which ones aren't. We need to focus all of them on public service and make sure that they get it right for us. And so with that, I will adjourn this edition of the Sergeant at Arms.